It's my pleasure at this point in time to introduce our lunchtime keynote speaker, Minneapolis Fed President Neel Kashkari. Kashkari took office as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis a little over a year ago on January 1st, 2016. In this role, he serves as the Federal Open Market Committee, or he serves on the Federal Open Market Committee, bringing the perspective of what's happening in the 9th District to monetary policy discussions in DC. In addition to his FOMC responsibilities, Neel oversees operations for the bank, which include supervision and regulation, payment services, as well as community development. He began his career as an aerospace engineer at TRW in Redondo Beach, California, where he developed technology for NASA space science missions. So, in a way, my bank president is a rocket scientist, which I appreciate. Following grad school, he joined Goldman Sachs in San Francisco, where he helped technology companies raise capital and pursue strategic transactions. From 2006 to 2009, Neel served in several senior positions at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. In 2008, he was confirmed as Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, and in this role, he oversaw the Troubled Assets Relief Program, or TARP, during the financial crisis. While at Treasury, he received the Alexander Hamilton Award, the Treasury Department's highest honor for distinguished service. Following his tenure in Washington, Kashkari returned to California in 2009, when he joined PIMCO as Managing Director and member of the Executive Office. He left the firm in 2013 to explore returning to public service. In January 2014, he was a gubernatorial candidate in the state of California, running on a platform focused on economic opportunity. Neel earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and his MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Today, his lunchtime remarks will focus on the key components needed to transform our nation's education system and improve educational outcomes for kids. Please help me welcome Minneapolis Fed President Neel Kashkari to the podium.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Michael, for the kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you at this important conference. Now, I'm going to give some prepared remarks, and then I look forward to taking your questions. I want to warn you, I'm going to challenge you in my remarks, and I hope you will challenge me right back with your questions in our active discussion. Before I begin, let me remind everyone that my comments are my own and do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve System. Now, the goal of this conference is to, quote, explore the interplay between the development of kids and their communities with an understanding that development factors into key economic and social aspects of kids' lives. Now, we know that there are many important factors that contribute to the health of communities and the opportunities that children have, including family, education, healthcare, safety, nutrition, among many others. All of those are important. But in my talk, I am going to focus on education because I believe that education, more than anything else, can and must be the great equalizer in our society. A child born into poverty who receives a good education can climb out of poverty and reach his or her full potential. You know as well as I do, and we heard it this morning, that children who stay in school and receive a good education are far more likely to stay away from drugs, to stay away from gangs, to stay away from crime, to get a good job, and to have a healthy, productive life. But the real power of education is that it transforms more than just one life. An entire lineage, future generations, children and grandchildren can be put on a safer, healthier, and more prosperous path. Education, more so than anything else, has the ability to break the cycle of poverty that continues to devastate so many families and communities. Children of parents who stay in school and get a good education are far more likely to follow a similar path. You know the old adage, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Well, I think we should update that adage. Teach a man or woman to fish and they will teach their children to fish. That is the real power of education. Now, you may wonder, Why is a senior Federal Reserve official talking about education? What does education have to do with the Fed? People have asked me that question, so let me answer it. Congress has given the Fed a dual mandate, which you hear us talk about all the time: stable prices and maximum employment. As I mentioned earlier, a key determinant of employment outcomes is education. People who receive more and better education tend to have more job options and lower unemployment. It is vital for us to understand education if we want to understand the drivers of maximum employment. And while the Federal Reserve may not have policy tools that can directly affect education, we do have world-class independent research capabilities that might be able to help. We have researchers in the Federal Reserve studying productivity growth that we as our nation's central bank cannot directly influence. So if we in the Fed can objectively analyze education models that can help more Americans get and keep good jobs, I believe it is important that we do that research and share our findings with other policymakers. This research might help us achieve maximum employment as a nation, which is our goal. Now, part of our nation's remarkable economic success, and we heard about this morning, over the past century came from investments in education decades ago, which led to an enormous lead in education attainment over other countries. In 1910, education levels were low everywhere. Even so, in the United States, we were the world leader, but only 11% of US working-age adults had completed secondary school. By 1970, that had climbed to 57% for America, but to only 22% for other advanced economies, giving us a big advantage in skilled labor. But then US gains started to slow, so that by 2010, just 62% of working-age Americans had at least a secondary education, while other advanced economies had climbed to 54%. So our education advantage eroded as other countries caught up. We must not stand still, not just for the sake of our economic competitiveness, but also so that we become a fairer society where all Americans have a real opportunity to fulfill their full potential. Now, the high end of our education system is second to none. But alarmingly, we still have terrible education gaps in our country. Americans of color and those living in poverty still today have far worse educational opportunities and outcomes than their wealthier white counterparts. In their most recent data available from 2014, 87% of white high school students graduated within 4 years. Graduation rates for Hispanics were 76%, for African Americans, 73%, and for American Indian and Alaskan Natives, 70%. In addition, children from low-income families are consistently behind in school achievement and graduation rates compared with children from higher-income families. In 2014, 75% of low-income students graduated on time, compared to 89% of students from higher-income families. This maps, of course, directly to employment outcomes. Today, while the headline unemployment rate for white Americans is 4.1%, it is 8.1% for African Americans and 5.6% for Hispanics. Among adults at least 25 years old, the unemployment rate for those who did not graduate high school is 7.9%, while it is only 2.4% for those who have a college degree. When we include those who are stuck in part-time jobs and those who have given up looking for work, the numbers are roughly twice as high. Now, over the last few decades, there has been a lot of attention, a lot of activities, and a lot of programs to try to close these educational and employment gaps. At the local level, in some communities and in some neighborhoods, progress has been made. I'm going to go off script here for a second. You know, when I've traveled around California and around Minnesota and around my district, I meet with many nonprofits and many schools that show me amazing things. They introduce me to kids and to families that they're helping, and I'm inspired by it. It's amazing what progress is being made. And then you go look at the national statistics. Where's the progress? It's one of two things. Either these small-scale interventions simply are rounding errors on the national stage, or the national statistics, would be even worse if you all weren't doing what you're doing. Maybe it's both. Either way, we have to admit it. We've been working on this for decades, but as a nation, we have failed. Continuing to deny millions of Americans their opportunity for a better life is a national tragedy. The time for targeted, small-scale interventions has long since passed. Now, I was one of the first responders battling the terrible financial crisis in 2008. One of the things I learned from that experience is you do not tackle a crisis with incremental solutions. You tackle a crisis with overwhelming force. So I ask you now, are we as a nation finally serious about closing our educational gaps? Do you agree with me that these gaps are a crisis? If your answer is yes, then we must move beyond targeted, narrow interventions and boldly pursue transformational, nationwide changes in our educational system. Now, some people will correctly point out to me that schools are responsible for educating kids. It's not their job to raise the kids. In a 6 or 7 hour school day, 180 days a year, how can we expect schools to compensate for so many potential challenging factors in the child's life? Think about it. The child is away from school 5 out of every 6 hours in a year. Perhaps it's not fair to expect schools to perform miracles. It is a lot to ask, but I do believe focusing on schools as a key point of intervention is essential. First, if we wait until all other aspects of a child's life are put on a good path, we will never get going. I agree, as we heard this morning, that high-quality early childhood education helps children arrive at kindergarten prepared to succeed, as my colleagues at the Minneapolis Fed have been working on for many years. But we need to follow up on those investments. If we don't, we will doom additional generations to a life of lost opportunity. Second, schools are a controlled environment that lends itself to change. They are institutions where policy can make a direct impact. And third, most importantly, the good news is there are schools that are truly transforming children's lives, schools that are nothing short of miraculous. I've seen them with my own eyes. This can be done. It's not too much to ask. Recent empirical evidence suggests that high-quality schools can be enough to increase academic achievement among the poor. There are schools, again, I've seen them with my own eyes, that focus on kids from poverty, whose parents never went to college. Oftentimes, English is the family's second language, and despite all of those challenging background factors, the schools educate the kids so that they perform as well as kids from wealthier families, from well-educated parents. Kids leave those schools career and college ready. It absolutely can be done. Now, although each of these miraculous schools is different, I have seen some common elements as I've gotten to know them. Usually, it starts with a great principal who is a visionary leader. That principal goes out and attracts high-quality, motivated teachers who share that principal's vision. Together, they create a culture of excellence and high expectations for every child, and they work as a team to achieve success for their students. Now, the details are usually different, customized for the needs of their students in that neighborhood. There is no one model that will work in all inner-city schools or across the country in all rural communities. The challenge with these miraculous schools, and this is not a criticism, the challenge is that they are hard to scale. Usually they add 1 grade level per year, taking great care to maintain and deepen the school's culture. It is a prudent, sensible strategy because too rapid growth could undercut the success that they're working so hard to achieve. After all, the principal and those teachers' jobs are to help their kids in that school. Their jobs are not to close the education gaps for all kids in America. That is the job of policymakers and researchers. But we must learn from those miracle workers and find ways to bring their success to all students. So what does transformation look like? If we are really serious about finally addressing the educational gaps in America, I believe we need an approach that delivers on 2 fundamental dimensions: customization and scale. Each community is different. Their families are different, the kids and cultures are different. One size imposed from above definitely does not fit all. But the approach needs to allow for innovation and customization while also working at the scale of millions of kids. If we aren't focused on meeting the needs of all kids in America, then we are turning our backs on all of those we leave behind. So I challenge you to honestly ask yourself, are you working on an approach that can scale to meet the needs of all kids in our country? If not, why not? We need to consider all transformational approaches that can deliver both customization and scale. I will now offer you one such approach for your consideration that I believe has the potential to dramatically close our education gaps. This framework has 3 components, which I'm going to go through in a moment. Number 1, maximum choice. Number 2, dispassionate accountability. And number 3, independent research. I will describe these components and how they could work together to deliver transformational change in our education system. Now, while I am not necessarily committed to this one specific transformational approach, I am committed to fixing a failing system. And so again, I challenge all of you and everyone reading this speech afterwards, go out and offer even better approaches. If you can beat this approach, do it. We want to hear from you because the status quo is unacceptable. So let me start with maximum choice. To explain this approach, let me begin with an example of choice at work. America has the best higher education system in the world. Students from all over come to America because of how strong our university system is. Choice is an essential element to that system. When young people approach their senior year of high school and they think about going to college, they can look wherever they want. The neighborhood college, the state university system, another state system, or private colleges. For example, even though I was born and raised in Ohio, I only applied to state schools outside of my home state. So what does this choice give us? It provides an essential ingredient for innovation and customization. Choice creates a marketplace where competition for students forces colleges and universities to try to improve. It eliminates the presence of local or national monopolies in the higher education system. Choice also forces universities and colleges to recognize that different students have different needs. Students choose their colleges in part based on how good those schools fit their own educational needs. Some colleges specialize in certain fields of study. Some offer smaller class sizes. Some offer a wider array of electives. Part of what makes our university system so effective is its ability to innovate and customize to meet the individual needs of students. Go back to my own example. I ended up going to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign because I knew it had an excellent engineering school, and that fit my own educational needs. So, in an elementary and secondary school context, the same principles can apply. I believe all parents across income, racial, and geographic boundaries should be able to choose where to send their kids to school. Traditional public, magnet, charter, or private. I attended traditional public schools through 8th grade, but my parents chose to send me to a private school for high school. In America today, middle class and wealthy families already have some forms of school choice. Some families, like my own, sent their kids to private schools. Other families get up and move to a better neighborhood to make sure their kids can attend good quality schools. Low-income families generally can't do either. Why do we prevent low-income families from having the same educational opportunities as everybody else? These are the kids that deserve the best schools, yet we give them the fewest options. Why? How is that fair? The great equalizer in our society is reserved for those already on top. Choice and innovation are essential to developing more miraculous schools that I described earlier, allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom, each tailored to meet the needs of their students, is the best approach I am aware of that can achieve both scale and the customization our education system needs. Now let me turn to the second one. But choice and the innovation it enables is not enough. In my view, it must be paired with dispassionate accountability to ensure that kids have access to high-quality schools. A recent study of a public school choice lottery showed that the lottery winners who attended their first choice school did better in college attainment only when they gained access to a better quality school. School quality was the critical factor. I believe there is a market failure in the elementary and secondary education market that requires policy intervention. It turns out it can be difficult for families to know if their neighborhood schools are actually good. You've no doubt heard the joke that most people don't like Congress, but most people like their own representative. By the way, I'm not picking on Congress. The Federal Reserve isn't popular either. But I suspect regional reserve banks are likely more popular locally than the system is as a whole. The same tends to be true of local schools. People are much more likely to be dissatisfied with their school system than with their local school or with their child's individual teacher, even if that local school or that teacher is a poor performer. It is hard for parents to know. Now, some states have tried to tackle this market failure by assigning letter grades to schools, A, B, C, D, F, based on some objective measure of schools' performance, such as test scores and graduation rates. It is harder for parents to ignore if their child's school earns a failing grade. Parents then tend to demand corrective action or the chance to send their kids to a different school. Not only do parents need information to make informed choices, but I also believe states or cities need to dispassionately shut down failing schools or replace management and staff when they fail to improve sufficiently. For the market to work, success needs to be rewarded and failure needs to end. The charter school movement nationally suffers in many areas because poorly performing charters are too often allowed to continue operating. Not only are the students in those schools harmed, but the performance averages for charters as a whole also suffer, masking the remarkable success that high-performance charters are having. One model could be for cities or states to create an independent, non-political body to objectively assess how schools are performing and issue letter grades to schools. If the poor performers don't improve quickly, shut them down or install new management and staff. The same standards should be applied evenly to all schools receiving government funding, including nonprofit and for-profit schools. One option could be to model such a structure similarly to the BRAC, the Defense Closure Base Realignment Commission, that made tough choices about military base closures in the 1990s. The decision to assess and potentially close a neighborhood school can be very emotional for a community. Anything that can make it less political and instill public confidence in the process will likely help. Regardless of the implementation method, I believe maximum choice combined with dispassionate accountability based on objective performance measurement is essential to developing a scalable, customized system that will meet the needs of all of our students. For example, evidence suggests that the charter systems in Boston and New Orleans seems to have a suitable mix of choice and accountability and are associated with impressive academic outcomes for children from a variety of backgrounds. Experts who examined the Boston charter school systems reported substantial positive effects and cited the key role of the system's accountability framework. In New Orleans, a number of researchers have studied the emergence of charter schools following the Hurricane Katrina tragedy and consistently found them associated with gains in student achievement. These examples highlight the use of choice and accountability in charter school systems, but these principles can be applied across other types of schools and within public school districts. The final component is independent research. Researchers in universities, think tanks, and nonprofits are playing an important role. They are helping to analyze what is working and what isn't. Researchers are helping to improve assessment methods for teachers and schools, and they are trying to identify and share the best practices that high-performing practitioners on the ground are pioneering. I don't believe our goal should simply be a marketplace for the survival of the fittest. Independent research, firmly based on data and critical analysis, will play a key role in helping all schools and all students succeed. To that end, the Federal Reserve is going to bring its substantial research expertise to bear on these important issues. In January, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis launched the Opportunity and Inclusive Growth Institute, where we are partnering with leading academics to conduct world-class research to measure, analyze, and make recommendations to improve the economic well-being of all Americans, with a particular focus on structural barriers that limit people from fully participating in the economic opportunity of our nation. While the Federal Reserve may not have policy tools that can directly affect educational outcomes and economic opportunity outcomes, we are going to do our part, and we will inform other policymakers of our findings. In conclusion, this Federal Reserve Community Development Research Conference is now in its 20th year. The first conference was in 1997. In those 20 years, more than 10 million American kids dropped out of high school. My question to you is, 20 years from now, at this conference in 2037, how many more kids will have dropped out? Another 10 million? More? Good intentions and a lot of activity are not enough. Results are what matter. If you don't like the approach I described, that's fine. What is your transformational approach? Can it scale to meet the customized needs of millions of students? Let's get it out there for consideration. At our current failure rate, in the roughly 25 minutes I've been speaking, approximately 25 more students have dropped out of high school. We're dropping them out at about 1 per minute. The clock is ticking. Thank you. So I'd be pleased to take your questions. We've got a couple mics up here. Anybody?
Is it turned on? Is it? Yes.
There you go.
Okay. So in the spirit of your remarks, so my understanding is that NAEP scores show that traditional schools across the country are now performing better than they have ever done. Given that, why is now the time to make sort of a revolutionary change in American public education?
Because the average NAEP scores don't capture and don't reflect the depth of the disparities that people are experiencing. So my view is, tell that answer to the family whose kid, living in poverty, who's stuck going to the neighborhood school, which is a poor performer. Tell them that the status quo is acceptable. I don't find that acceptable.
Sorry, can I take the other mic for a sec?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so first of all, I think, and I would think a Federal Reserve economist would be wary about these kind of averages. I think we might, for example, let's talk about PISA for a second, which is, I'm sure, another set of scores that you feel shows our schools are failing. And I would suggest to you shows something very, very different. That shows that we have phenomenal schools, and we have much less good schools, but it's not only about schools, it's about so much else, and I'll give an example. In the last round of PISA, for example, we had several states that offered to oversample as if they were independent countries. And 2 of those states happen to be Massachusetts and Florida. And they provide very, very, I think, instructive outcomes. I don't know if you saw those, but the kids in Massachusetts, by the way, across the board, so averaging, including those kids who you assert are in really crappy schools, performed on par with Finland. The entire state of Massachusetts performed on par with Finland. Those are the best readers and best performers in the world. The kids in Florida performed on par with Romania. Okay, so that's not probably a country that we want to be on par with, but it certainly suggests that we should be very, very careful about averages. It suggests something else. It suggests that Massachusetts is doing a ton, and it's not just about its schools. Massachusetts is also much less poor than the rest of the country. It invests a ton in its schools. It invests a ton in its pre-K. It's the first state to have universal health care. And it has some of the most equitable school funding in the country. Okay, so not only are we capable of having superb schools, and we have them, we can have them at a whole state level, and it doesn't require a miracle. Okay? Okay, what it requires is a concerted effort and investment from bottom to top, which is what I think we're here to talk about. And I would give you an example. I guess the other thing that surprised me about your talk was to have a Federal Reserve economist suggest that a miracle was a good basis for policymaking to begin with, because to me, those are opposites. A miracle is a God-given accident, and we're talking about a concerted strategy, and so I'm going to go ahead and answer you at the district level. I run a campaign called the Broader, Bolder Approach to Education, and we work with not individual schools, but entire communities across the country, mostly very, very high poverty, heavily minority communities. And what those communities do is the polar opposite of what you're describing. What they do is start from the very early age, knowing that those gaps open up before kids get to school and schools don't cause them. They mostly persist through school. They're almost all there before kids begin kindergarten. And then they take that same whole child approach that is true in education and wrap the entire community around that child from K-12. Okay, so those kids are getting tremendous results. And this is true from a tiny rural community in conservative Arkansas all the way up to big urban districts that are doing this. Okay, there are a few charter schools here and there, but they are not the basis for this transformation. And these kids are graduating high school. These kids, often poor black kids in those schools, are graduating high school at above the state average. Those kids are going on to college, and this is very scalable and requires no miracles or intervention by God at all.
So I appreciate the comments. So let me ask you, please stay. This sounds wonderful. And then when I step back and I look at the data on disparity in our country, I can't imagine that you think that the disparity in the data in our country today is acceptable. So where's the disconnect between the wonderful story that you're telling and where is it on the ground? Why isn't it happening? Why doesn't it show up in data? Why do we still have these disparities by race and by poverty?
Well, we have those disparities for lots of reasons. I think one of them is that these communities, these kinds of communities that engage the entire community, that start in early childhood and go all the way through, don't get enough attention. Part of it is that when they do get attention, they get dismissed as it can't be done, even though they are being done. And part of it is that we're trying too hard to create escape hatches for a minority of kids, rather than looking at approaches that would actually bring the whole community together and invest in our schools. So I think when we start investing in our schools and stop telling them that they're failing, we will be doing a lot to narrow those disparities.
I love your optimism. And the challenge I just have is...
And I'd be happy to show you the case studies. By the way, they're based entirely on actual data.
I'd love to see it, because when I look at the data over the last 20 or 30 years, it's everywhere in the talk and nowhere in the data nationally. Next question.
Well, I would say that 20 or 30 years ago, we changed. You actually said we went from being the 70s, early 80s to not being as good in education, and that was the result of an administration that wanted to defund the Department of Education. And so we have really created a culture where we do not value public education, which you rightly pointed out is the way we all move ahead. And we also had an experience with busing in many cities in this country years ago that was a failure, trying to take kids out of their poor districts and put them into other districts and other districts into their districts to try and integrate. When really what we should be doing is creating exemplary public education, but there is no appetite for taxes. And taxes are what are funding public education, and it's what we do not talk about, and nobody really wants to change the narrative that the government is bad and we need to do everything on our own. So I think that there's history for why our education systems have failed, and it's our own fault for being selfish and not wanting. I don't have kids. I don't mind paying taxes, but most people, when their kids are out of school, are done with paying taxes, and it's all about paying forward. Public education is about paying forward, and we do not want to pay for that.
Thank you.
So I'm a regional economist, and so I want to take your talk and look at what you did do, which was look at the forward linkages of education, right? If you get educated, you can have access to the job market. What your talk hasn't talked about, and I hope we all do today, is the backward linkages. Our educational system is completely tied, as the previous speaker just said, to our housing policy. We have plenty of data that shows when you have moderate levels of income diversity in your school, all the way up to 20, 30% poverty rate in your school, the educational outcomes in those kinds of schools is almost exactly the same as if you had zero poverty in your school. It's when we talk about schools that are 97% poverty that we never are going to get to the kinds of scale that you're talking about. Well, let's look at everywhere in the data that you probably have at the Federal Reserve, schools that are 90% free and reduced lunch or greater. And then you look at the market, the housing market that's right around it. They're probably, I come from Baltimore. This morning, the Bureau's numbers just came out. We apparently lost 5,000 people in the last 3 years. So if we have declining population, and the only people that truly have choice, as you say, to move are the people that can afford it. If you come to Baltimore, I welcome you to come anytime. I can show you all this data, that the only people that are left in the place that we had the severe rioting in 2015 is our public housing and the school.
Yep.
That's the only thing left in that neighborhood, and there are 1,800 vacant and abandoned properties right around that school. So imagine you said that they spend 180 days in the school. Well, they're spending every other aspect of that day in the community that they're living in. So they're walking past 35 out of 100 abandoned properties on their way to get home. And once you have a declining population in a neighborhood, all of the other resources that could possibly come to that neighborhood will also go. Retail, like a bank. You won't get a bank because there's no retail options there. You won't get a grocery store, so you don't have food security. And all of those things start to deoxygenate a population and a neighborhood, and it is that specific. You come to one neighborhood, you go 3 blocks down, and the housing market is perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. It happens here in Washington, D.C., it happens in Baltimore. How can that be if the education policy is completely devoid of our housing policy? We don't have a coherent housing policy in the United States, and I would love for the Federal Reserve to talk about that.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments.
Question?
Hi, Neil. I'm going to try to phrase a little bit of this as a question for you, so you get a chance to answer.
You don't have to. I'm fine if it's just a statement.
No, I know you are, but I think it's actually very helpful. I mean, so one of the challenges we have is the political economy of our education system. And that's kind of the concern that people have been raising and different aspects of it. So I was curious, given that well-off families are consistently spending more money on education, they spend more money on out-of-school services, they spend more money on everything involving their children, how would you propose to revise the political economy when the choice of wealthy households is going to, significantly support the deviations that are already in the data?
Sure. Well, look, I think that's exactly right. I mean, to further points on it, middle class and wealthy families get tutors for their kids. They've got summer programs, after-school programs. That's all true. And we certainly don't want to discourage them from doing that. Obviously, more is better. But we do want to raise the bar so that everybody at least gets a basic high-quality education. And when I talk about miracles, I'm not talking about interventions from God. I'm talking about amazing schools that are serving the neediest kids. And I have visited these schools myself. I have met their parents. I've met the principal. I've met the teachers. There are schools that I have visited in California and in the district, the 9th District of my Federal Reserve, where they work with the same population, very low income, English second language, poverty, parents didn't go to college, and they do have extraordinary outcomes. I call them miracles because of the extraordinary outcomes that they are having. But they're humans that are delivering this. These are not acts of God. And so what I'm saying is we need to raise our expectations and say that, let's not make excuses that because a young person is living in poverty or their family has a challenged background, that this can't be solved. It absolutely can be solved, and I've seen it done in schools with those same populations. And so I agree with you. I don't want to discourage well-to-do families from making choices that give their kids even better opportunities, but I do want to make sure that every kid in America, every family in America, has at least an opportunity for a good education. And if we can do better than that, that'd be wonderful.
Bonjour, my name is Barb Faber. I'm from the White Earth Ojibwe Nation in Minnesota. And I am a transformation zone out of the Race from the Top. And I live and work in a zip code that is in an extreme poverty area. I want to commend the Federal Reserve Bank for all they've done for Indian country. I think that there's a lot more work that we need to do for the 0 to 3. In Minnesota, there's a childcare crisis. And this morning when Jack and Art talked about the 0 to 3 population, we need to think about that. Where are those 0 to 3 children? They're in childcare. And, excuse me, they're underpaid. We have more people leaving the business. And so it's a crisis. And I think that if the Federal Reserve Bank, other foundations, and the state and tribes, of course, we need to really look at that, because if we don't do something now, in a few years, there may not be enough slots. The parent-aware rating system has helped extremely. It's a great competition for providers, and it helped in our area. Out of our 21 tribally licensed sites, 19 of them are 3 or 4 parent-aware rated. That's what's saving us to hold our childcare. But you know, they serve children year-round. They serve children 50 hours a week, and they need that support. So I just implore everybody to please take a look into your community. How can you support your childcare community? Because they are a part of the successful economic development. So
thank you. Very important.
Hi. So when we're thinking about this connection between schools and housing policy and choice, which I think is sort of where, you know, all of this comes down to this idea of what parents are able to access for their kids. And it is certainly true that in high poverty neighborhoods right now, parents are not able to access the same kinds of choices that wealthier families are able to access, right? If you have wealth, you are able to buy a home in a desirable district. And in fact, those parents don't even actually do much research on the schools themselves. They just know that their status peers have the same kind of educational expectations for their kids, and so they're able to purchase homes in those neighborhoods and go ahead with that education. Parents in high-income neighborhoods, high poverty neighborhoods rather, have very different sets of choices and very different sets of needs for the schools that they're confronting. I think one of the issues when it comes down to schools like the charters in Boston, for example, which are touted as having amazing outcomes for these kids, there are a couple of things that happen. One is that the lotteries take kids in, but who stays all the way through graduation is not consistent. That by the time you get to graduation, you have kids who have been winnowed down through an educational process that has standards that I would not put my child through. I would absolutely not put my child in an education system where they have to line up in the hallway and stay silent and not talk and not use the bathroom. There are educational expectations that we put on these kids in the defense of no excuses that I don't think most of us in this room would tolerate for our own children. And so when we talk about those as the way to close the achievement gap, I think we're creating a separate tier of education for low-income kids, asking them to meet expectations that we don't ask affluent kids to meet at all. And then I think sort of the other piece of that puzzle then is how do those kids get pushed out? And a lot of that is through incredibly high discipline rates, which we do have also long-standing data on the racial disparities in discipline, which have negative outcomes for incarceration and earnings and completion. So I think when we talk about school choice, we have to think about the labor market, the housing market, and we have to also think about what the educational expectations are and whether, as folks who would tout choice as the way to go forward, that we're really talking about equal expectations between the choices that we would give to low-income kids and the ones that we would really hold for our own children.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, I've just been notified that I'm out of time. I promised you I would challenge you. I think I met that. And thank you for challenging me right back with the questions and comments. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.